Mayor, you may proceed.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Max. It is Tuesday, December 7th, 2021. This is a virtual special meeting of the Commissioners of the City of Rehoboth Beach. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 2:30 p.m. exactly. Before I continue, I'd like to make two acknowledgments about today, December 7th. Off the website information. Since 1933, the governors of Delaware have proclaimed December 7th as Delaware Day in honor of that day in 1787, when Delaware became the first state to ratify the federal Constitution, thus making Delaware the first state in the new nation. I'd also like to note that today, December 7th, is National Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day, a day that lives in infamy even after 80 years. And today is the day we honor those who lost their lives in the attack of Pearl Harbor. If you have not been to Cape Miles State Park, at Cape Henlopen State Park, they have, at least in September, they had an excellent exhibit on the USS Arizona and Pearl Harbor. I'd suggest if you're a history buff, you take a little time to go see there. With that, we'll continue with the meeting. I want to call roll call. Commissioner Tim Bennett.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Tony Sharp.
Here.
Commissioner Susan Gay.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Jay Legree.
Here.
Commissioner Ed Shranowski.
Here.
And Mayor Stan Mills. We have a full complement of the mayor and commissioners. We're able to formally conduct business today. Thank you all for being here. I'd also like to thank all the watchers that are not in the room with us, but watching at home, either live or recorded. We appreciate you being here. And we also thank those that pre-registered to speak today. Those are pre-registered to speak are Mr. Rick Perry and Dr. Michael Trayos. We will, of course, call on you at the appropriate times during this meeting so that you can share your thoughts on this important topic. With that, I want to go to identify that no correspondence other than Dr. Trayos indicating he wanted to sign up to speak. With that, we'll go and mention that the purpose of this special meeting is to formally present the Wilmington Baltimore Avenue Streetscape Project to the commissioners and to the public, including, and today's objectives are noted in the 4 bullets of the agenda. We'll start off with reviewing the background information on the project. We will receive concept plans by Rossi. We will receive costing information by Rossi, and we will allow for public input and commissioner discussion. We'll make note at the end of this meeting that we have follow-up meetings already scheduled and on the calendar. So with that, I'd like to explain the genesis very briefly of the Wilmington Baltimore Avenue Streetscape Project vision through the CDP. And again, this is just very broad, but in the current CDP under Chapter 8, Rehoboth's Built Environment, it explains that some of the city's goals are to increase the commercial viability and attractiveness of Wilmington and Baltimore Avenues and First Street, and specific priority actions for the city to achieve these goals are to study how to physically upgrade the first 2 blocks of Baltimore and Wilmington Avenues and First Street to improve their commercial viability, safety, ambiance, and access by pedestrians, including creation of a design image that would describe an architectural character for each block to be used as a source of ideas. I would like to just, as a quick aside, let you know that the design image is not a part of the Wilmington Baltimore Avenue project, but I want to let you know that during the budget meetings, I intend to propose that we fund designing streetscape gateways and fund contracting to develop design standards for the commercial areas, likely going through Davis Bowen Friedel, that of course is designing the Rehoboth Beach Patrol building and the renovations or new construction for the public restrooms at Baltimore. So those, I will just giving you an alert. With that, I want to reiterate, and I think our presentation will reiterate and articulate where the 7 blocks are of this proposed project. First and second block of Baltimore and Wilmington, as well as connecting blocks of North and South First Street and the south section of South Second Street, because the North Second Street is already completed. Streetscapes are not new in Rehoboth Beach. The previous realized streetscapes include Rehoboth Avenue, the entire length from the boardwalk all the way to the canal. That was designed and engineered by JMT Engineers. A second streetscape completed was Lake Avenue Phase 1, 3rd Avenue to Rehoboth Avenue, and that Kersher Engineering was working on that with us. That segued into Lake Avenue Phase 2, which was the 3rd block of Maryland and Olive Avenues, plus a section of North 2nd Street from Rehoboth Avenue to Olive Avenue. And that was, again, done by Kersher Engineering. So those 3 streetscapes have been realized. And some of the common elements of those streetscapes include, where possible, widened sidewalks, new parking patterns, travel lanes that were widened and standardized, certain amenities, undergrounding for the Rehoboth Avenue project, an analysis, but no undergrounding of the Lake Avenue phases 1 and 2 for undergrounding. And just like to make a note of the contrast with the Wilmington-Baltimore streetscape is that absent the amenities, that those elements are the same focus of the Wilmington-Baltimore Avenue Streetscape Concept Design Phase 1. As I've mentioned at task force meetings and elsewhere, the design and selection of amenities comes later. That's a second phase. This is just Phase 1 that we're going to have explained to us today. Sharon, I'd like to turn to you if you don't mind, and if you would explain an ongoing relationship and partnership with DelDOT. They obviously they worked, I think, on all 3 streetscapes with us, but any input from you would be appreciated.
Correct, and thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Commissioners and the public. As the Mayor just said, the relationship with DelDOT has been in existence for a long, long time, and I know that we work very closely with DelDOT, and they're folks who attend our meetings, and we're in contact with them very frequently. So I'll also say that since Mayor Mills came on board September of 2020, the Wilmington-Baltimore Avenue Streetscape has been very important to him. In November of 2020 was my first recollection of meeting with the mayor and Kevin Williams, Evan Miller, meeting with staff to begin thinking about how to organize and how to approach the project, Wilmington-Baltimore Avenue Streetscape, and continue with that and further that. In doing that, we also began speaking with DelDOT and reached out to DelDOT to ascertain basically their interest and any possibility of the city applying for any TAP funding, TAP grant funding. We actually were successful, and we applied and pursued a DelDOT planning concept grant, and were awarded $50,000 when DelDOT thereafter assigned one of their engineering planning consultants, Mike Hahn, to assist the city in our effort to coordinate that with the city. We did put out an advertisement in December, advertisement requesting proposals for streetscape planning and conceptual design for the first 2 blocks of west of the boardwalk of Baltimore and Wilmington Avenues, 1st Street between Baltimore and Wilmington Avenues, and 2nd Street between Wilmington and Rehoboth Avenues. As the mayor said, this would be to improve commercial viability, safety, ambiance, and access by pedestrians and bicyclists. The proposals were due in the latter part of January. We did cancel that RFP, and speaking with DelDOT, and because of the $50,000 award from DelDOT, DelDOT actually selected the Rossi Group, a group they had been familiar with and worked with. And the Rossi Group is a certified women-owned business based out of Hunt Valley, Maryland, with a local office here in Dover, Delaware. I will firmly say that the selection of the Rossi Group was done with very broad objectives, and they were not directed, as the mayor mentioned also, to do a complete analysis of amenities. That would be in part two of this. The amenities would be benches, any lighting, and the like. So the city staff team, with the mayor's input, and I know the mayor will go over this, designed the Wilmington-Baltimore Task Force. The staff designed a membership application requesting interested parties to apply, and 16 business owners, residents, and others applied and were accepted. We started meeting with the task force virtually in March of 2021 with ex officio members of city staff there also. Turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Very good. Thank you very much, Sharon. I'd like to go into a quick review of the genesis of the task force. Of course, we call it the Wilmington-Baltimore Avenue Streetscape Task Force, even though it contains some of the project area of 1st Street and 2nd Street. But the project mission statement for this task force is, quote, to further the vitality and advance a vibrant, attractive, and pedestrian-friendly downtown through cooperation with stakeholders who work, visit, and reside in the city of Rehoboth Beach. Some of the task force objectives, the overall objectives of the task force is to provide streetscape recommendations to the city project team and, when applicable, to the Board of Commissioners. Very important to me because I'm very proud of this group. They put a lot of time in it and a lot of commitment. That I would like to take a couple minutes just to identify the members of the task force and do a little commercial for some of them and tell you who they're with. We had 16 members overall, and I'm just going to read them in alphabetical order. Jenny Burton, who is an owner or landlord for the shops at 33 Baltimore and the shops at Rehoboth Muse. Frank Cole, who's an owner of Atlantic Cycles and the second cycle shop on Baltimore. I can't remember his name. Frank Cooper is a resident. Daniel Fosnot is a manager at Oceanus Motel. Randy Haney, owner of Blue Moon Restaurant. Patty Hoffman, owner of Stitch Statch on North 1st Street. David Mariner, executive director of Camp Rehoboth. Andy Menick, owner of Sea Change Vacation Rentals. Howard Menaker, resident. Alex Moore, partner in the Avenue Inn, Beachview Hotel, and other property ownership on Wilmington Avenue. Elise Moore, who's not related to Alex, is an owner of the Admiral Hotel on Baltimore. Bob Pomerantz, an owner of Brighton Suites Hotel and owner of Hunt and Lane on Wilmington. Joe Baker, owner, Henlope and Oyster House and Blue Hen Restaurants. Commissioner Edward Chernowski, representing Main Street. Commissioner Pat Caluzzi, representing the City Street and Transportation Committee and the Parking Task Force, and myself. That yields 16 members. As I mentioned, one of the overall main objectives of the task force is to provide recommendations. So I wanted to share with you real quick before we hand it over to Rossi. Some of the, this is a support document embedded into the agenda, so I'm not going to go through it all, but I would like to highlight some of the main thing. Again, these are the guidelines developed by the task force that were then passed on to Rossi to use as their foundation for creating the concept designs. And I'd just like to read some of the highlights here. Overarching interest of the streetscape improvements is to bring pedestrians and bicyclists and other alternative modes of transportation, such as scooters, onto Wilmington and Baltimore avenues, and to include streetscape elements that will attract that kind of traffic, including bicycle parking, landscape sitting areas, landscaping, beaches, lighting, etc. And again, as Sharon and I have both mentioned, the amenities come later, so it's going to be absent today, but it is in the guide for the future phase. Some of the other guidelines: retain and enhance the unique character of each block of Wilmington and Baltimore avenues within a coordinated system of streetscape. The task force said that doesn't have to match the character exactly of the streetscape on Rehoboth Avenue, but there can be some uniqueness there. Use shared bike lanes over designated bike lanes. Minimum traffic lane width should be established and standardized. We suggested 10-foot minimum, but 11 or 12 feet are as feasible. Consider maintaining tapered travel lanes in the first block of Wilmington and Baltimore avenues. For those that aren't aware, if you stand on First Street and look toward the ocean on Wilmington or Baltimore, the street is actually flared, and it is wider at the ocean end than it is at the narrow end. And this, I don't know the real genesis of it, but this is often done to give you a better view down the street and avoid tunnel vision, so to speak. There's also a benefit, as probably Mr. Trayos will tell you if he speaks later, that the wider traffic lanes toward the ocean are a benefit for trucks and deliveries. Another guideline: use turn lanes selectively. More guidelines: treatment of easterly street ends on Baltimore and Wilmington at the boardwalk treat them as gateways. Consider the need of delivery and emergency vehicle access the entirety of the street. Provide adequate space for vehicles, including delivery trucks and emergency vehicles, to turn from 2nd Street onto Wilmington and Baltimore Avenue and vice versa. Pedestrian circulation pathways, which is a fancy name for sidewalks, essentially, should have minimum widths and be standardized if possible. In all applications, the pedestrian circulation path should be as wide as feasible. Parking inventory: number and placement of parking areas is to be determined. Minimum parking space dimensions were recommended and accepted. On South 2nd Street between Wilmington and Delaware, consider opportunities to park on the east side of the road, adding some spaces. Accommodate undergrounding of utilities. Give consideration for improved stormwater management, which would come at a later phase. And incorporate design for the to-be remodeled or enlarged Baltimore Avenue Beach Patrol and restroom facilities. Incorporated those in, and likely they would be part of the gateway design. So those are some of the guidelines, again, that were passed on to Rossi, and that we'll see how well they utilize some of those in their concept plan. From there, I want to turn it over to Rossi. Do you want to introduce the players? Nope. We'll go right in. We'll have self-introductions of the Rossi team and turn it over to you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. My name is Alexis Morris. I assume you guys are also hearing the feedback that I am? Or is that gone now?
Yeah, we're getting some reverberation. Go ahead, start again and see.
Okay. My name is Alexis Morris. I'm with Rossi Group. I'm an environmental and transportation planner. Are we still getting feedback?
A little bit, yes, ma'am. We'll. I don't know if we can work on it on our end. Our guys will be working on it.
I haven't had this issue with Ring on my end, but that doesn't mean that it's not on my end. We'll give them a moment to kind of.
We're not hearing anything yet now.
You're not hearing anything now. Okay, thank you very much. So my name's Alexis Morris. I'm an environmental and transportation planner with Rossi Group. As Sharon mentioned, so we are a women-owned business based out of Hunt Valley, Maryland, but we also recently opened an office in Dover, Delaware. We're very excited and happy to be working with the City of Rehoboth Beach and DelDOT on this very exciting and innovative streetscape improvement project in Rehoboth Beach. And with that, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Display settings. All right, are you guys seeing the slide itself, or are you seeing the notes and next slide preview as well?
Yeah, we see your slideshow plus your outline on the right side.
I had a feeling. Okay. Let's go ahead. I think that should be fixed now for you.
There you go, full screen. Thank you.
Not a problem. And I'm going to minimize everybody else's screen. So fair warning, if you raise your hand in the video chat, I will not see you. But feel free to jump in and interject at any point should I need to slow down, stop, or speak up. Again, my name is Alexis Morris with Rossi Group. We are a consultant to DelDOT. DelDOT is the administrator of Federal Highways Administration Transportation Alternatives Program. TAP is the funding mechanism for the streetscape concept development through DelDOT. Eligible activities through the TAP program include installing sidewalks, creating bikes and multi-use pathways, renovating streetscapes, installing lighting and sidewalks, things of that variety. As Sharon mentioned earlier, Wilmington and Baltimore Avenue Streetscape concept development was funded through TAP, and future efforts could be funded through TAP, but there's also other methods out there that would likely require city financial participation. The concept recommendations are the result of the coordination with the Streetscape Task Force comprised of property and business owners, community organizations, and city commissioners and staff. The mayor did a fantastic job of emphasizing we really are just at the beginning of our concept development here. So you can kind of see a process flow chart. Again, we're in the beginning. Design comes next, and part of that design is the aesthetic treatment, but also some more detailed design studies. So goals of the streetscape concept development were to elevate the perception of the commercial core relative to the boardwalk and Rehoboth Avenue, and make sure we're putting an emphasis on bringing pedestrians and bicycles, as well as other alternate modes of transportation, potentially scooters, mopeds, onto Wilmington and Baltimore Avenues. We also wanted to make sure that we included areas for streetscape elements to attract those traffic types, including amenities such as bicycle parking, seating areas, landscaping, lighting, and green infrastructure. Sidewalk improvements would enhance vehicular and non-vehicular movements, including providing parking accommodations while also benefiting adjacent property owners and businesses. The objectives within those goals included providing ADA accessible walkways and widening walkways for pedestrian traffic and outdoor activities, increasing safety and visibility at crosswalks, increasing safe pedestrian and bicycle travel, and increasing connectivity to the boardwalk and Rehoboth Avenue. The first part of our study was an analysis of existing conditions. We went out, we walked the site, took quite a few photos, and some general observations that were made include the poor condition of existing sidewalks and crosswalks, ramps and curbs that needed upgrades. The physical and visual connection between the boardwalk and these streets was limited. There's certainly room there for enhancement. In many locations, and I'll provide a table here that kind of outlines some of our typical widths, but what we saw was parking dimensions were less than standard. Travel lanes also in some locations were less than standard width. In many areas, the travel lanes, while being less than standard width, they're also designated bikeways. So those bikes have to compete with the motor vehicles in these very narrow travel lanes. Again, the sidewalks are in poor condition, but there's also a lot of different elements that are competing for space within the existing sidewalks. There's a lot of driveways and fire lanes. Obviously, that's going to have restrictions to parking and sidewalk use, and limited scooter parking throughout the project area. And drainage areas or drainage upgrades are needed throughout. So I mentioned real quick, we took some rough measurements. Obviously, these weren't survey measurements, but just to kind of get an idea of what we were looking at. The pedestrian circulation path, which the mayor mentioned, is kind of a more detailed explanation for roughly the sidewalk as well as adjacent buffer areas. And I'll go into greater detail on what that includes in a moment, but it varied in width. So in some locations, we were looking at widths less than 5 feet, upwards of 15 plus feet. Travel lanes also varied. So the 8.5 feet that you see in the 8-foot turn lanes, those are on First Street. Obviously, those are the narrower locations within our study area. But then those travel lanes also expanded up to 12 feet and beyond. So beyond meaning the flared areas, they are closer to the boardwalk. Again, parking throughout the project area varied. So kind of for just comparison purposes here, we've shown what our recommended minimums are, but I'll go into greater detail about how we got to those recommended minimums in just a moment. We also looked at related projects and studies within the city. So obviously continued coordination is going to be required based on the status of these studies, where they're at, and any approval or recommendations that may come out of them. Utility undergrounding certainly is being considered, and I think that team is scheduled to present to the commissioners later this month, but the mayor can talk about that later. We also have the beach patrol and restroom facilities. So that's an ongoing design. It happens to be going on concurrent with this design. The team shared proposed designs with us. We also understand that that isn't necessarily approved at this time and may be subject to revision. So when we looked at the beach patrol and restroom facilities, we have a designated area blocked off for design by others, but obviously continued coordination would be required. Additionally, the city is in the process of developing ADA parking design standards. So while we've outlined ADA parking, or we've outlined, I'm sorry, parking within the project area, that parking is subject to revision based on what the ADA standards that the city depends on turn out to be, and obviously modifications to parking would be required to make sure that they're meeting those design standards. So concept development and our recommendations. As I mentioned, we developed recommendations. To do so, we looked at DelDOT's pedestrian accessibility standards. We also looked at the road design manual, the manual and uniform traffic control devices, the City of Rehoboth Beach Code, and City of Rehoboth Beach's comprehensive development plan. The pedestrian circulation path, again, I kind of touched on this a moment ago, but it incorporates what's referred to as the pedestrian access route, as well as buffer area. So sometimes these areas are sidewalk, sometimes it's tree pit planting areas. It also includes the building frontage. But the important, I think, element here to kind of understand is that the pedestrian access route itself is that clear, unobstructed route that is located within the pedestrian circulation path. Areas less than 5 feet in width do require a pedestrian passing area that is per ADA requirements. Of course, there's a number of other ADA requirements that go along with the definition behind the pedestrian access route, one of which being cross slopes that could be no more than 2% or less, and then no vertical gaps. So again, just another picture of essentially what those elements of the PCP or pedestrian circulation path are, including building frontage, PAR, and buffer areas. And this, I think you'll recognize as Rehoboth Avenue, just kind of a nice depiction of those various different elements. Again, to ensure compatibility, we wanted to make sure that we were looking at the 2012 Rehoboth Beach Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan that recommended sharrows on 1st and 2nd Streets. This is consistent with the recommendations of the task force, actually, to include shared lanes, and then the 2010 Comprehensive Development Plan. So high level that really focused on assuring the connectivity, walkability, safe and unrestricted pedestrian passage of all sidewalks, and then streets designed to enable safe access to all users within that citywide integrated network. And using those various different elements, we developed the following recommendations. The pedestrian circulation path We recognize that there will be areas where it's less than 7 feet, but we really strive to maintain a 7-foot minimum throughout. And you'll see that in our concept displays, kind of in an orange outline. But the broader additional space is colored in yellow. Travel lanes, so throughout we've provided 11 or 12-foot travel lanes. The 11-foot travel lanes are being provided on 1st Street and 2nd. This is due to constrained right-of-way within those areas. The 12-foot minimum travel lanes are what we proposed on Wilmington and Baltimore Avenues. A 6-inch curb throughout, and then parking throughout, we've recommended that it be modified to include standardized sizes for head-in parking and parallel parking. And then because neither Baltimore nor Wilmington Avenues are one-way streets, we've decided that eliminating the angled parking would be the better, more efficient way to utilize that space. Key highlights again within the pedestrian circulation path, and you can kind of see in our snapshot here that 7-foot pedestrian access route, and then the shaded in yellow is the additional pedestrian circulation path with some amenities shown. These are just drawings or sketches of the concept. Design remains to take place, so where biking or scooter locations are in the future, that remains to be designed. In general, no narrowing of our pedestrian access route to less than 5 feet. We enhance the crosswalks and ramps for safety and ADA compliance. The bump outs that you see here, so that helps to shorten the pedestrian width and increase visibility while also increasing the pedestrian circulation path, creating additional space for amenities to be determined in that design phase. One thing that we did do was through consultation with emergency services, we confirmed what sizes were for emergency access vehicles, but as well as transit vehicles within the area. And essentially what we've done is modeled a WB40, which is the equivalent to a 40-foot wheelbase small semi truck, or all of the emergency vehicles and buses that we've determined are likely to drive along these routes, and the turning movements that are allowable or permissible out there today would remain a possibility in the future. Another thing to highlight within that pedestrian circulation path, the buffer and frontage ideas, different things that might be considered and would be part of that aesthetic treatment to be determined at a later point in time. And then I've already touched on much of this, but the key highlights being those travel lanes. So on Wilmington and Baltimore Avenues, we have through lanes that are a minimum of 12 feet wide. And then within the first block, those lanes widen from 12 feet to 16 feet as you get nearer to the boardwalk. On 1st and 2nd Streets, the through lanes and turn lanes are 11 feet wide. And throughout the study area, bicycles would share the roadway marked with sharrows. No specific bike lanes would be designated. Key highlights for parking. Vehicular parking, again, parallel and head-in is upgraded to meet the standards as per our recommendations. Angled parking would be converted to head-in parking. One thing that we did do in consultation with the task force and the city staff was we proposed parking be removed on 1st Street. This helps to accommodate the widened travel lanes as well as the pedestrian circulation path. And consistent with the 2010 CDP, which recommended the removal of parking on the west side of 1st Street for the first 2 blocks. So of course, all parking as demonstrated in our concept displays is subject to revision in coordination with property owners, fire EMS, and ADA requirements, still in development. But what we ended up looking at, based on this high-level concept, of course, is a reduction in parking from 329 existing spaces to 247 in the proposed scenario. However, consistent with the goals of the project and streetscape development, we were able to enhance the scooter and bike rack locations. So we go from 58 existing scooter locations to 88, and 8 existing bike racks to 21. Another element of the concept that was developed is essentially a pedestrian plaza or limited vehicle access zone at the boardwalk side of both Wilmington and Baltimore Avenues. And our current sketch shows two different scenarios, one being a turnaround at the boardwalk end of Wilmington Avenue, and the other being more of a turnaround area, no parking zone, but less of a cul-de-sac type design on Baltimore Avenue. And in many cases, that's the result of kind of what's going on in those areas in terms of driveways and access to adjacent properties. These turnaround no parking zones would allow for drop-off and deliveries. Obviously, EMS can then still access these areas. It provides a nice transition space between the streetscape and the boardwalk. And it provides visual interest and attracts beachgoers onto Wilmington and Baltimore Avenues. Provides increased space for additional amenities such as landscaping and seating. And again, would maintain those existing movements and accessibility of EMS deliveries, things of that variety. So a few quick sketches. Again, this is just the sketch of the concept that was developed. Design remains to be completed, so any of the streetscape elements that you're seeing here are obviously subject to that design revision, but this is intended to be a demonstration of the concept in action. Another, I guess, for the commissioner's awareness, so these displays, the larger version of these displays that was shared with the public at our public meeting, those are still available at the convention center. So Wilmington Avenue first block, again, you can see the limited vehicle access zone here. Baltimore Avenue second block, Baltimore Avenue first block. And again, touching real quickly, but that pedestrian circulation path is the combination of the yellow and the orange pedestrian access route. You can see the travel lanes are defined, the driveways, no parking areas. We have also demonstrated the existing curb compared to the proposed curb. So you can definitely see that the curb lines would be revised in some areas. Obviously, because we're talking about widening the travel lanes as we get nearer the beach and still providing as much parking as feasible, there is some modification to existing curb lines where, in fact, they've been taken in. Parking pay stations, scooter parking, etc. So, and then North 1st Street, South 1st Street, and South 2nd Street. One point to make is the task force did ask us to look at parking on the east side of South 2nd Street. When we did that and presented that concept to the task force, there was some talk and concern that providing essentially what was 2 parking spaces in front of roughly what's labeled here as a Zero Italian oven and bar would be kind of outside of what the existing stretch of roadway is here. Currently, there's no parking in this area. So one of the concerns was that that may create additional conflict where currently there is none. It was the team's recommendation after seeing that we go ahead and remove those 2 spaces. So that's what you see here with this concept. And again, the removal of parking in the first blocks of North 1st Street and South 1st Street. And so those were the concepts that were presented to the public. And we advertised a public open house through the Del Dot and City websites, as well as direct mailings to adjacent property owners and media coverage. The public meetings were held September 29th between 9 and 12 at the Rehoboth Beach Convention Center. At that meeting, we had 53 attendees sign in. That included 7 of the commissioners, as well as 7 additional task force members. And connected to the public workshop, there was a 30-day public comment period open through October 28th, during which time the public was invited to either email or mail comments or drop them off at the city offices. So during that time, 29 comments were received. This included one from the City of Rehoboth Beach Trees and Green Infrastructure Committee. Out of those comments, what we have here is a quick overview. The comments have been provided to the commissioners, it's my understanding. Should you want to look at each individual comment, you're welcome to do so. Out of the 29 comments received, we received 14 comments specific to the Baltimore Avenue Beach Patrol facility. Again, that's outside of our project scope, but because it's a connected action, obviously people are very interested in it, and those comments are worth sharing with the commissioners. Again, there was also a concern about the loss of vehicular parking. 10 of those comments were received. 7 of them were specific to loss of parking on First Street. We received 4 different comments noting concerns about the narrowing of intersections or adding bump outs. 4 comments about the location or quantity of scooter and bicycle parking. So one thing worth noting here is that in some cases it was you've provided too much. In other cases it was you've provided too little. So you do kind of have to look at each individual comment to fully evaluate that. Aesthetics, landscaping, and maintenance were also concerns or interest areas expressed in 4 different comments. So that included who would be maintaining this later, or we need more of a unique neighborhood feel, or where are the aesthetic and landscaping treatments. So also that we received 3 requests to further expand or comments in favor of the pedestrian access zones, and 2 different suggestions to provide 4-way stops at the intersections. In general, however, we did have support for the streetscape recommendations. It was an acknowledgement that something should be done within these corridors, obviously. All of the comments, of course, will be evaluated in the next phase, and many of these concerns would be addressed in that design phase. Obviously, continued coordination with the Beach Patrol facility is critical to anything that may happen on Baltimore Avenue. So the cost estimate for this design, and it's important to know that this is concept level only. It includes major quantities, contingencies, and percentages to account for unknown or unforeseen items. Also includes preliminary engineering. What it does exclude is cost for right-of-way easements or utility undergrounding. So all of the concept as currently laid out would all take place within existing right-of-way. So we've not included that right-of-way cost. Any temporary easements or other easements would have to be coordinated at a later date. We have broken the cost estimate down by segment. I think that one of the important notes related to that is that it's not really it costs X amount of dollars to do 50 linear feet of project. It's really specific to the individual location and some of the different factors within that location, whether it's utilities and other resources, parking, things of that variety. So our next steps, I think with that slide, we'll hand it back to the city. And I certainly look forward to hearing any of your questions or comments.
Thank you very much. Go ahead to the next slide if you would. And I just wanted to let you know what the next steps are here. I have 2 streetscape meetings, special meetings already scheduled. One is for a week from today at 2:30. And at that meeting, we will receive logistics analysis by JMT engineers related to undergrounding utilities in the studying area, including cost estimates. If you recall, that was not in the scope of Rossi to look at undergrounding. So we hired a specialty engineer, JMT, who has done undergrounding work for Rehoboth Avenue in the city, as well as the main Garfield Avenue on Bethany Beach and otherwise. They've got good experience in that. So they will be at the next meeting. And then after their introductions, we will engage in introductory commissioner discussions on whether or not to move forward on the design, engineering, funding, and construction. including discussion of hiring a city project manager to assist with project phasing and budgeting. So that would be December 14th. And then after that, I've scheduled for January 4th, a third meeting at 2:30, where again, we would continue discussing if and how to move forward on all this project, and I do that. With that, I will say we can turn it over to commissioners. I wasn't anticipating a lot of discussion today because I thought everybody might want to wait and cogitate a little and receive the information from JNT. But I would like to make a couple comments, and now I'll be the first maybe to say, yow, that cost us a little higher than I'd hoped for. And the loss of parking is certainly something to raise eyebrows over, but I understand a lot of it. I do believe it is a great vision. I think it needs to be pursued. And I think the challenges can be overcome. You know, we did Rehoboth Avenue Streetscape, and that was seemed to be way beyond our pockets back then, and we found a way to do it. And I'm convinced that we can find a way to do this project, and that the value is needed. I will indicate that I don't remember if it was mentioned that DelDOT, in terms of the bump outs at the intersections, there has been some comments about them being too difficult on the turning radiuses for semi-trailers and fire trucks and et cetera. So that is something that before we get into redesign entirely, DelDOT has offered to come out and do some real life scenarios and surveys with us so that we can actually lay them out and have some trucks do those turning radiuses, see if indeed they work as well as the modeling engineer model works. With that, I wanted to further just give a comment on gateways. I think gateways from Baltimore and Wilmington are an excellent idea and guide from the task force. But I want to make sure that we know that, at least in my mind, I integrate those with the gateways with turnaround no parking zones and low vehicle access zones. If you don't know what they are and you haven't been following our task force meetings, the turnaround zone and the no parking zone are somewhat should be obvious when vehicles, whether it's personal vehicles or semi-trailers or fire trucks, whatever, go to the end of the street. As best we can, we'd like to accommodate U-turns at the end of the street near the ocean. And so that's what a turnaround zone would be, and include no parking in that area, of course. Then there's something called low vehicle access areas that are drawn in the concepts. They are not set in stone whatsoever. They're just concepts in these plans. And the low vehicle access areas might be an area that where the asphalt ends, and the low vehicle access area then turns to pavers to better distinguish it from the regular travel lanes. And it's allowed for vehicles to pull up in there, UPS for delivery, for instance, or a personal vehicle for drop off of beachgoers. And so that's what that area is for. But there's also this thought of a gateway there that could be an extra area that has grass in it or picnic tables or sculpture or whatever. So again, those are all to be determined. But I would say that they would all integrate somehow and should integrate somehow. And that's where, again, during the budget talks, I'll be proposing that we have DBF be assigned to designing that gateway in the end of the street, especially as it conforms and integrates with the beach patrol redesign and public restroom design, should they go and remain at Baltimore Avenue. With that, we do have some members of the public to speak. But before we go there, I'd like to see if there's any comments from the commissioners, keeping in mind again that our next meeting is where we will be receiving information and analysis on undergrounding and what those costs are. Anybody? Commissioner Legree. You're muted. You're muted.
I also am the most muted commissioner
We got
in
you.
Rehoboth Beach. Is there a magic height for curbs? And the reason I'm asking that is you have 6 inches, and most new cars nowadays are between 6 and 7 inches of clearance at the front. And you put 2 passengers in the front and you can't get to you scrape on a 6-inch curb. Is there ever a way that you could make 4.5-inch curbs or something like that, like they do in Europe? Thanks.
Jay, Alex can certainly answer that, but what I would like to suggest is that in the next phase 2 of this is when we would engage not just a consultant for us, but with an engineer to design phase 2. And that's where I think the exactitude comes in placement of drive aprons, curb heights, final dimensions from facade front or property front to the curb and things like that. So there's a lot of specificity still to come. And I think you have a good point, because even brand new Rehoboth Avenue Streetscape, there are places where I can pull right all the way up to the curb, and my front of my car has adequate clearance, and there's other places where it scrapes, and so that's a very good point. Anything else, Jay?
No, that's fine. I have a lot of other things. We can save all that till amenities or on whatever you want to do. I'm good with anything.
Very good, very good. Are there any comments on the broad concepts presented? Yeah, if not, let's go ahead and go to the public, and we can come back to the commissioner.
Sorry, Stan, I have one quick
Yes, Commissioner
clarification question,
Gossick,
if I
go
may.
ahead. Yes, sir.
Just on the design, just curious, are these designs based on utilities underground or aerials? Because I noticed there's places for transformers and also utility poles and light poles. So is this either or how is this based to interpret?
Alexis, do you want to answer, or I can take a stab at it? That they are concepts. There's no exactitude there in placement of there, but they did take into account that there needs to be space for transformers, and so that's where they allotted them. But again, we're going to be hearing from JNT on that. If we weren't undergrounding and we said just stay the course with telephone poles, and they very well might have a different concept there. Alexis, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you touched on it pretty spot on there. Obviously, what ends up happening with utility undergrounding in the direction that
Sorry, I can't hear you.
the direction that the city should go with the utility undergrounding would certainly affect any concept design that's developed. But when we drew up the concept sketch, the intent was to show or demonstrate that if there's pad-mounted transformers, there's space within the existing or the proposed pedestrian circulation path for those pad-mounted transformers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything else, Commissioner?
And just, I guess this is further in the design, but are these the PCP areas, and then specifically the PAR areas, are they designed with any outdoor dining concepts in mind, or is this strictly just a walkable area?
Within the next phase, when the team's looking at specific design, those essentially the yellow areas might be the areas where you can design or consider that outside dining. That would have to be coordinated with the property owners, obviously adjacent.
Okay, so that's all right away and width though, but minimum of 7 feet is what you're speaking of?
Correct. The orange line that you see on those concepts, that is the 7-foot minimum pedestrian access out. So that would be the area where you certainly wouldn't want to put outside dining or other potential obstacles.
Sure.
Obviously, the pedestrian access route that we've demonstrated or laid out on that concept, that could be shifted one way or another, depending on what amenities might be desirable in an area.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anybody else? With that, we'll go to the members of the public and then come back to the commissioners, except it looks like Commissioner Tim
Tim's
Bennett
got
would
his
like to
hand
go.
up.
Tim Bennett, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. I just had a quick question. I was wondering whether the Rossi Group or the task force had considered doing a plan or exploring a plan that had no parking in the first blocks.
That was not in the cards for the task force. We indicated very early on that was not conducive to this project.
Okay, so is that something we would consider in the future, or is that off the table?
For me personally, it's off the table. I mean, there's already grumpiness I'm hearing about the loss of what we have, and to remove all the parking from the first 2 blocks of Wilmington and Baltimore, I think that would likely force us to have to put in a parking garage or other alternate to make up for it. So, I mean, that is something that was not entertained by the task force.
Mayor, could I add on to that?
Yes, sir. Ed, Commissioner Sharnowski, go ahead.
Sure. Tim, I was on the task force, or am on the task force. It was discussed early on about having limited vehicle access on those blocks, which would not include parking or vehicle traffic, except for deliveries or folks going to the parking lots that are connected to the hotels. That was very, very quickly shot down by the task force. So I wouldn't say it wasn't completely entertained. It was discussed briefly, but very quickly decided that it just wouldn't work on those 2 streets for us.
Thank you,
Okay.
Ed. Thank you, Ed. Yeah, and just to clarify that you're right. When we talked about this in the nature of low vehicle access zones, and what was posed was, are the low vehicle access zones just at the end of the street? For what kind of distance, 100 feet, 200 feet, or for they half the block or the entirety of the block? So again, it was not favored to go anything beyond what was shown. Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. With that, we will go to the public and then come back to the commissioners. Rick Perry, are you on board?
Yes, I am here, Mayor.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a couple of questions. One, did the task force consider discussing with, actually, do you think you could go to Dr. Trayos? I have to take care of a contractor here.
Yes, sir. We'll come back to you, Rick. Dr. Trayos, are you available?
Yes, Mayor Mills, thank you for allowing me to speak at this time. Thank you. And Mayor Mills, I just wanted to...
excuse me, Dr. Trayos, can I just explain to those that don't know you, or if you would tell us, identify yourself and what properties you own, that would be helpful.
That would be fine. My name is Dr. Michael Trayos. I am a co-owner of multiple properties in Rehoboth Beach, predominantly with regard to the streetscape concept. We are the co-owners of the properties located at 1516 South Surf Avenue, which would be 7 through 15 South Boardwalk and 1 Wilmington Avenue. Again, those would include the Gus and Gus, Boardwalk 5 and 10, Dave and Skippy's, Starkey's Ice Cream, and Zog's Restaurant. Does that help you now, Mayor, in that regard? Is that sufficient?
Yeah, but you might be being bashful. I think you also own a place on North First Street that'll be impacted.
That is correct. That's correct. We are now the current owners of the Nicola properties on First Street. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Go ahead, Doctor.
Okay, thank you. Wanted to just, first off, Mayor Mills, I wanted to dovetail your excellent observation and comments that you have made thus far. It continues to be my recommendation that, again, the travel lanes closest to the boardwalk, and again, you all know my interest in public safety, be left as wide as possible in order to ensure adequate access to the fire EMS vehicles and the delivery trucks. You are correct, and I'm pleased to hear that DelDOT will actually do on-site evaluations because, as we all know, Computer-generated models often do not always accurately represent how wide travel lanes need to be in order to deal with issues such as public safety and delivery trucks. The other item that I would just like to dovetail with, and Mayor Mills, you have already eloquently discussed it, is that I and other property owners and many business owners have expressed at past meetings and at the public event at City Hall from several months ago that we are very concerned about the elimination of parking on the North First Street. Most property and business owners are open to the selective removal of certain parking spaces as it relates to the turn lane onto Rehoboth Avenue and to increase sidewalk width in areas. But the wholesale elimination of parking spaces on North First Street, I feel should not be permitted. And Mayor Mills, I'll leave just to those comments, and thank you for allowing me to speak.
Very good, Doctor. Thank you for coming on board and sharing your opinions today. With that, Rick, are you finished with your contractor by any chance?
Okay, pretty much.
Go ahead.
I'm back here, and I agree with a lot of the things that Dr. Trayos just expressed. I too am glad that DelDOT's going to come in and do some actual testing with regard to the turning radiuses and width of lanes and all. I have been concerned with some of the recent redevelopment that fire trucks especially might have some difficulties with some of the turning radiuses at the intersections. And so I agree that actual testing would be a good idea. I have, for clarification purposes, and maybe I'm the only member of the public confused, but you're talking about the next phases and the next phases. The $24 million to $27 million, what does that cover? Are we looking at additional expenses for subsequent phases, such as planning the aesthetics and things of that nature?
One more inspection form.
You dropped off. Are you still there, Rick?
No, I'm still here. Yeah, I was just asking whether or not the $24 million to $27 million estimate covers subsequent phases, which from what I'm understanding, would include such things as, deciding on aesthetics and things of that nature. I mean, are we looking at something more than $27 million here?
I don't know, Alexis, maybe you can respond. Let me interject something in here, Rick, and for the others. The task force came up with these guidelines, and they reacted to different things happening and did a fantastic job. Please know that they are on hiatus, if you will. They're not sunset. They're going to stick around. And at some point in the future, when we get to this point, hopefully we'll get to the point where we task them with looking at amenities and working with the new engineer and our consultant to come up with the exact types of light poles and things like that, wireless poles maybe, gateway design, improving that. So that's in the future. But the second phase is, as I understand it, Alexis, is to actually start engineering, designing, and construction. So this is an idea that for us, the hopeful total costs are as articulated there.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anything else, Rick?
Well, I have one other thing, and it relates to parking, which of course is a perennial issue here in town, as we all know. And I'm fully in favor of the elimination of a lot of the parking on North First Street, because I think the way the situation is now is frankly very dangerous to both pedestrians, bicyclists, and vehicular traffic. But is there any consideration, or was there any consideration given to bringing in a parking consultant, a parking specialist, to make recommendations to the city as to, how or where we might replace some of these parking spaces that we're losing. And the number now seems to be much higher than it was initially. I had heard, and I don't know whether or not this is true, that a resident in town had offered to have a sort of national parking group or some company come in and provide the city with some free analysis of parking, but apparently that was rejected. Is there any thought to at least consulting with parking specialists at this point?
Part of our future discussion, Rick, will be to talk about hiring a city rep for ourselves. And I expect that that would probably fall under that rep to represent us and give us some consultation and analyze everything. And then from there, work with the second engineer that's actually doing the specifications and designing. This whole thing of parking or no parking is an interesting conundrum for me. In one case, I look at it as, okay, you remove some parking, but you gain a wider sidewalk. I'd like everybody to take a walk between the post office and the breakers. No, is it called the Sandcastle? And take a look between the Sandcastle and the breakers at a brand new streetscape there with much, much wider, I think 2 feet plus wider sidewalk there, and how wonderful it is. This is a one-shot deal. If we're gonna do it, we ought to do it right, and we ought to do it assuming that the density and population is going to increase over the decades in front of us. So take a look at that the best you can. But the conundrum for me is I look at it as, okay, you remove a parking space, you gain the extra width there. Take a special look and study the the McDonald's corner. What is that? The northwest corner of North First Street and Rehoboth Avenue. Take a look at that. If you don't remove a parking space there or a travel lane there to widen the sidewalk, you end up rebuilding a brand new streetscape that mirrors exactly what is there. And for me, what is there is absolutely inadequate. We've got to do that. So if you're a store owner or maybe a restaurateur, is there one way to look at loss of parking or not of parking? One way I look at it is you lose parking, you get a wider sidewalk. Wider sidewalk, maybe you get the opportunity to add a twofer table against your front facade. We don't know what the rules are going to be in the future for outside dining, but that's just on my mind. Maybe with removing the parking, you get a wider sidewalk, and that facilitates a couple dining tables outside. The alternative is leave the parking there, have a narrower sidewalk, and remove all opportunity to put a dining table out there. I mean, I don't know if that's a valid scenario, but it is on my mind. Are there any other commissioners?
I disagree with you, Mayor. I think you're absolutely on point, and I think we need to look to the future and think about the possibility that outdoor dining may be something that would become permanent here, much the same as it is in other communities, here in the U.S., but certainly in Europe, particularly, given what we've been through with the pandemic. And so, yes, there have to be some compromises between parking and the size of the sidewalks, and I'm all in favor of wider sidewalks as well.
Thank you, Rick. Any other comments from the commissioners? I do want to. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Gay.
I mean, see, I'm off mute. Okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I agree with you about the conundrum of the various competing interests. And there's so much interest now in outdoor dining and in more pedestrian areas. And, if we're going to do that, something has to give. And that's just a decision we're going to have to make. at some point. But what I was gonna say and ask is, you were talking about both the phases as well as the costs. And I know we have a long way to go with design, and I get that anything we're looking at now are just estimates. But the underground has to be added to the cost as well. So when we see that presentation next week, we'll have that piece of the puzzle, right? So the 24 to 27 million clearly doesn't include that. And we'll be looking at a much bigger number after that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and so that means we might as well get used to looking at a bigger
Yeah.
number. Because I did notice on the slide with the cost estimate, there was a little asterisk, and at the bottom it said that number is based on it all being done at once. And Rehoboth Avenue was actually done in 3 phases. So, that has some bearing on the cost as well. I assume that's why that note was there. But interestingly, I agree with you. When I first saw the number, when we got the slides yesterday, I gasped when I saw it. But then when I looked up, the total of the Rehoboth Avenue project was about 34 million. And in today's dollars, that would be about 50 million. So by that, the 24 to 27 probably doesn't sound so bad. Also, I think we're in an especially good environment. If Rehoboth Avenue wouldn't have been done without grant money. I mean, state and federal grant money. From what I hear, it would not have been done without that. And it seems like we're in a particularly good environment now for infrastructure grant money. So maybe that's a good thing. The timing of this.
Very good. Very good.
That's all. Yeah.
Anybody else? I want to remind you that the next 2 meetings scheduled are for a week from today, 2:30, where we'll receive information from JMT on undergrounding, the logistics and costs, and then delve into what the next steps are and if we want to go that direction. And then again, I've scheduled for January 4th, a 3rd Streetscape meeting just to have it on a schedule. Are there any further comments, or shall we wait for the next meeting?
Just one further comment, if I may, about the Rehoboth Avenue Streetscape. I think, Stan, you and I were probably the only ones around when that was done in an elected position, if you will. And you're correct. The funding on that actually was about 50% DelDOT, 25% city, and 25% from the feds. So it was a shared expense all around. And the project lasted about 5 years from the first concept, if you will, which started in spring of 2000, I think, and didn't end until May of 2006. So it's a drawn out process, but certainly was very successful over that period of time.
Very good. Correct. Thank you very much. If there are no more further comments, then I look forward to seeing you on December 14th, 2 o'clock to continue this conversation. Thank you very much. And with that, this meeting is adjourned at 3:42 p.m. Thank you.